otherwise. The chief said something in Mohawk. He sounded indignant. The plastic walls of the lock swelled inward, burying and overwhelming them. Pumps pounded briefly, removing what air was left. Then the walls drew back, straining against their netting, and Joe waited for the door to open to empty space. Instead, there came a sharp voice in his helmet phones. It was Brown.
"Radar says there's a rocket on the way up. It's over at what is the edge of the world from here. 3 gravities only. Better not go out."
Joe hesitated. Brown still issued no order. But defense against a single rocket would be a matter of guided missiles. Brown's business, if the tin can screen didn't handle it. Joe would have no part in it. He wouldn't be needed. He couldn't help. And there'd be all of the elaborate business of checking to go through again. He said, uncomfortably, "It'll be a long time before it gets here, and 3 gravities is low. Maybe it's a defective job. There have been misfires and so on. It wouldn't take long to try this wagon anyhow. They're anxious to send up a robot ship from the shed, and these have to be tested first. Give me 10 minutes." He heard the chief grumbling to himself, but one tested space wagon was better than none. The airlock doors opened. Huge round valves swung wide. Bright, remote swarming stars filled the opening. Joe cracked the control of his forward liquid fuel rockets. The lock filled instantly with swirling fumes, and instantly the tiny space wagon moved. It did not have to lift from the lock floor. Once the magnetic clamps were released, it was free of the floor, but it did have mass. One brief push of the rockets sent it floating out of the lock. It was in space. It kept on. Joe felt a peculiar twinge of panic. Nobody who is accustomed only to Earth can quite realize at the beginning the conditions of handling vehicles in space. But Joe cracked the braking rockets. He stopped. He hung seemingly motionless in space. The platform was a good half-mile away. He tried the gyros, and the space wagon went into swift spinning. He reversed them and straightened out, almost. The vastness of all creation seemed still to revolve slowly about him. The monstrous globe which was Earth moved sedately from above his head to under his feet and continued the slow revolution. The platform rotated in a clockwise direction. He was drifting very slowly away. "Chief," he said wryly, "you can't do worse than I'm doing, and we're rushed for time. You might come out. But listen, you don't run your rockets. On Earth, you keep a motor going because when it stops, you do. But out here, you have to use your motor to stop, but not to keep on going. Get it? When you do come out, don't burn your rockets more than half a second at a time." The chief's voice came booming.
"Right, Joe. Here I come."
There was a billowing of frantically writhing fumes, which darted madly in every direction until they ceased to be. The chief, in his insect-like contraption, came bolting out of the hole which was the airlock. He was a good half-mile away. The rocket fumes ceased. He kept on going. Joe heard him swear. The chief felt the utterly helpless sensation of a man in a car when his brakes don't work. But a moment later the braking rockets did flare briefly, yet still too long. The chief was not only stopped, but drifting backwards toward the platform. He evidently tried to turn, and he spun as dizzily as Joe had done. But after a moment he stopped, almost. There were then 2 red-painted things in space, somewhat like giant water spiders floating forlornly in emptiness. They seemed very remote from the great bright steel platform and that gigantic ball which was Earth, turning very slowly and filling a good fourth of all that could be seen. "Suppose you head toward me, Chief," said Joe absorbedly. "Aim to pass, and remember that what you have to estimate is not where I am, but where you have to put on the brakes to stop close by. That's where you use your braking rockets." The chief tried it. He came to a stop a quarter-mile past Joe.
"I'm heavy-handed,"
said his voice disgustedly. "I'll try to join you," said Joe. He did try. He stopped a little short. The two weird objects drifted almost together. The chief was upside down with regard to Joe. Presently he was sidewise on. "This takes thinking," said Joe ruefully. A voice in his headphones from the platform said,
"That rocket from Earth is still accelerating, still at 3 gravities. It looks like it isn't defective. It might be carrying a man. Hadn't you better come in?"
The chief growled,
"We won't be any safer there. I want to get the hang of this."
Then his voice changed sharply.
"Joe, do you get that?"
Joe heard his own voice, very cold. "I didn't. I do now. Brown, I'd suggest a guided missile at that rocket coming up. If there's a man in it, he's coming to take over guided missiles that'll overtake him and try to smash the platform by direct control, since proximity fuses don't work. I'd smash him as far away as possible." Brown's voice came very curt and worried.
"Right."
There was an eruption of rocket fumes from the side of the platform. Something went foaming away toward Earth. It dwindled with incredible rapidity. Then Joe said, "Chief, I think we better go down and meet that rocket. We'll learn to handle these wagons on the way. I think we're going to have a fight on our hands. Whoever's in that rocket isn't coming up just to shake hands with us." He steadied the small red vehicle and pointed it for Earth. He added, "I'm firing a 6-2 solid fuel job, Chief. Counting 3. 3, 2, 1. His mount vanished in rocket fumes. But after 6 seconds at 2 gravities acceleration, the rocket burned out. The chief had fired a matching rocket. They were miles apart, but speeding earthward on very nearly identical courses. The platform grew smaller. That was their only proof of motion. A very, very long time passed. The chief fired his steering rockets to bring him closer to Joe. It did not work. He had to aim for Joe and fire a blast to move noticeably nearer. Presently he would have to blast again to keep from passing. Joe made calculations in his head. He worried. He and the chief were speeding earthward, away from the platform, at more than 4 miles a minute. But it was not enough. The manned rocket was accelerating at a great deal more than that rate. And if the platform's enemies down on Earth had sent a manned rocket up to destroy the platform, the man in it would have ways of defending himself. He would expect guided missiles, but he probably wouldn't expect to be attacked by space wagons. Joe said suddenly, "Chief, I'm going to burn a 12-2. We've got to match velocities coming back. Join me? 3, 2, 1. He fired a 12-2. 12 seconds burning, 2 gravities acceleration. It built up his speed away from the platform to a rate which would have been breathless on Earth, but here there was no sensation of motion, and the distances were enormous. Things which happen in space happen with insensate violence and incredible swiftness. But long, long, long intervals elapsed between events. The 12-2 rocket burned out. The chief had matched that also. Brown's voice in the headphone said,
"The rocket's cut acceleration. It's floating up now. It should reach our orbit 50 miles behind us. But our missile should hit it in 40 seconds.
"I wouldn't bet on that," said Joe coldly. "Figure interception data for the chief and me. Make it fast." He spotted the chief a dozen miles away and burning his steering rockets to close again. The chief had the hang of it now. He didn't try to steer. He drove toward Joe. But nothing happened. And nothing happened. And nothing happened. The 2 tiny space wagons were 90 miles from the platform, which was now merely a glittering speck, hardly brighter than the brightest stars. There was a flare of light to earthward. It was brighter than the sun. The light vanished. Brown's voice came in the headphones.
Our missile went